Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Whoa. Maybe a little bit less. I have a good voice. But that woke you up, I guess. Good morning. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start the first session, and this time I'm the session chair. And the first presentation is Philippe. Philippe is a regulator and a good friend of mine from Australia. He worked in France for a number of years in an Odour laboratory, a very successful Odour laboratory. And now he's setting regulations regarding Odour in Western Australia. Philippe? Here he is. So I'll hand it over to him for his presentation on the Odour regulation and Odour management, possible and necessary synergy. It's open? Ah, good.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a good night. And I think we have another good day in front of us with large and good presentations. First of all, I want to thank Ardevan and all his team for inviting me today and yesterday for this conference. I think it's a very well prepared and very well organized conference, and I want to thank also all the team behind all the organization and Hessam in first place. Thank you for that, very well organized. Today what I want to discuss about is an approach that is close to be adopted in Western Australian regulation. And basically I will show you where we were when I started in 2008 in the Department of Environment of Western Australia, and where we are now and where we are heading to. Now, what I want to know also at the end of the presentation, you may have some questions, of course, but what I would like to know is if you have, from what I will present, do you have that already in place in your jurisdiction, or is it something or an alternative that you may think about? I will be really interested for that, and if you have some information to share with everybody, I think 1 or 2 people, it would be good, or at least come to see me because I would like to have some feedback if you have that already implemented. Basically, my story started about 8 years ago. I got the, yeah, it's on? Yes. Okay, so my story started about 8 years ago, and in 2008 I started to work with the Department of Environment Conservation that become now Department of Environment Regulation in Western Australia. And I'm working as an Odour specialist there. And basically, a month after I arrived, my manager came with a big pile and just put that on my desk and say, "Oh, Philippe, if you can go through that and see if you can find something with the experience you had in Europe and France and etc." And I said, "Okay, let's have a look." So I looked at 3 things. What were the plant? Because it was an issue, it's a contentious site. Hundreds of complaints over the last 6 or 7 years. And so it was a composting site, but very simple one, enclosed, digester, windrows within aeration floor, suck the air, goes to the biofilters. So something very simple as a process. Second thing I looked at is where it was located, 400 meters from the sensitive receptors. And I said, okay, it's a bit close, but I thought initially that what happens, as usual, you have the plant and more encroachment, residential encroachment. But it wasn't the case, because houses were there first and they put the plant after. I thought, okay, maybe not the best idea. Third thing I looked at is the license. So license is equivalent to the permit. I don't know how you call that in your jurisdiction, but you see what I mean. And basically I looked at the license to find anything that is related to odor. And big surprise, no odor conditions in the composting plant. So I thought, oh, a bit strange. It was 2008 in Western Australia. And so it's where we started. And I worked very quickly in the next year about 1 or 2 other contentious sites, and every time similar patterns came. And it's what I want to show you today about where we were. In 2008, 2009, when we worked about the complaints, we had about 60% of all the complaints received by the department were about odors. So more than 1 complaint out of 2 in the Perth area, but in statewide also. More than 1% complaint out of 2 was about odors. quite large. You can see now that for the last years it decreased. So I hope that it's partly because of our job, and I'm happy just to think about that. Not only, but but I want to show you now where it comes from. In 2008, 2009, what happens? There was a rapid growth of population in Western Australia. We increased by 20% in 5 years' time. Big rush, mining, petrol, and etc. So a lot of people coming, and you need housing for that. So what happened is you had more and more encroachment of residential area close to existing industrial area, or in these existing rural areas, poultries, piggeries, and so on. And you had on the other side a high level of awareness of for the community, and a high quality of life expectations from the community. So altogether you had a good cocktail, okay, to create concerns and to create issues. Incompatible land use, encroachment, okay, plus on the regulatory side, the limited tools, the limited policies just to do something. Basically what we had at the time, because we didn't have anything in some licenses about odor. So it means what we had, the only gauge we had were the complaints. How this plant is managed, look at the complaints. It's quite limited. Okay, we know all together, a lot of people here know the limitations you have with complaints. Complaints are interesting, but you have a lot of limitations with that. And you had those more and more contentious sites with that. And basically when I went through that, I went through some conditions in license. So either no conditions or some little conditions not enforceable at all. So we couldn't do anything. So license regulator point of view, can't do anything. From proponent point of view or industry point of view, can't do a lot because they didn't know a lot where the odor were coming from. And when I did a little bit some investigations about the pattern we found, okay, what I found, the main observation are this one. You have this one. What I call uncertainty on process and operation, it means a lack of understanding of the process. Lack of understanding not only from the regulator point of view, that was the case, because we didn't have a lot of experience in process and so on, and my concern with the process engineering and chemical engineering background, I do not understand how you can regulate efficiently if you don't understand the process. Unfortunately, it was a bit the case in the department about 7 years ago. And sometimes what is a bit worse, even the industry and the industrialist didn't understand really his process, doesn't know where the risks were, where the sources were. So when you don't have that, it's difficult just to understand the emissions because you don't understand your process and the origin. You have limited monitoring to know whether a process is efficient or not because you don't know what to monitor. You have an absence or ineffective corrective actions or contingencies to put in place if something goes wrong. And basically also another important thing, there is an absence of inappropriate communication. What I mean is coming from Europe in the late 90s and early 2000s, where we understood in Europe and in France at least that working between the proponent and the industry or the regulator and the industry like that rather than like that, okay, just make a lot of difference for everybody. It was a win-win solution. You don't waste time, you don't waste money. And basically when I arrived in Australia, they were really like that, okay? And looks just like that from the presentation yesterday. I feel that in Canada, it's still a bit more like that, and not really like that either. So I try to change and bring my experience with that, just to improve a little bit that. And if you look at the big picture, okay, the big picture tells us that there was a poor management, basically at the plant. You can have some efficient equipment and etc., but poorly managed, you don't have some efficiency on that. So basically, we were at a level where we need to change something. And what we did is we requested the contentious side to go to some audits and propose some improvements and upgrades. From the regulatory side, we went from, little or non-enforceable conditions like odors should not unreasonably interfere with welfare, amenity, health of anybody else, of anybody outside boundary, okay? And just remember it will be the presentation of the person of GHD, don't remember the name, sorry, from yesterday, where basically just emphasizes this point, where you had some conditions that with a lot of subjectivity on this one, and to enforce that, you just forget. And also so now we moved from these little enforceable conditions or no conditions to some conditions that were a little bit more outcome based and based on some measurement at the source, okay? So basically some limits on odor emissions on the biofilters from the specification of the manufacturer, or also what we call some surrogate parameters. And surrogate parameters is, for example, when we have that in few licenses now, when you have a biofilter, to have some measurements on odor emissions at the biofilters every quarter, okay, that's fine, gives you an idea, okay? I'm at 200, I'm at 500, I'm at 2,000 odor unit, okay? It gives you an idea. But it's not good enough just to have good management, and good management is a daily management. So you need to find some surrogate and parameter that you will be able to daily monitor. And for instance, biofilters, when you know a little bit how a biofilters works, you try to find the critical parameters you have to follow. And the one we found is relative humidity or moisture at the inlet of the biofilters, temperature at the inlet, and pressure. Because the plant, and especially the plant I told you, the composting plant, when I arrived, they had a biofilter that is a huge monster biofilters, but you should have also in Canada, I think, because you have some space. About, 2,000 square meter or more than that. I don't remember the surface, but very large. 72, so 280,000 cubic meter. And sometimes they enter some air at 40 degrees, 40% humidity. So I can tell you the bugs, I think they cooked the bugs, but the bugs were not very efficient. So basically we said, guys, if you want to have a biofilters, and we can't say that it will be surely worked perfectly, but if you have this parameter, the humidity above 85%, your temperature between 20 and 40 degrees, you maintain that, we are quite confident that it will work. If you don't have that, your biofilters with the time, okay, will go wrong. So we moved to that. And also another important point in Western Australia, we don't have any other modeling, okay, to demonstrate the compliance. So it means you don't have any license where it's said you have to, every quarterly, you have to assess the odor emissions from the various sources, put that in a model, and show that the model doesn't exceed this value at this distance. For all these reasons. And basically we have that because for existing sites, the point is we don't have a lot of faith put in modeling, and it relies on unrealistic, because we think it relies on unrealistic expectation of precision and accuracy of the predicted impact, okay, so for existing sites. So now, just before we saw what happens with the existing sites, okay, contentious sites, where they were, what didn't exist, where they moved to from an industry point of view, where we moved to from a regulator point of view. Now I will show you also when you have a risk assessment about an application for a new or an existing plant to be expanded. Here are what we found most of the time in any application that will arrive on our desk. And what we found basically is quite similar for the beginning of what we saw for the existing site. Limited understanding and consideration of the process and the management, okay, by the industry, and limited understanding from DRs also sometimes still. Limited monitoring awareness, okay, about what should be monitored. When there are no possibility to get some data, okay, you use some literature data, okay, normal things. Unfortunately, what we see in the report is sometimes they use some data, they don't demonstrate that this data can be applicable to the case they are dealing with. And when you investigate, and when I investigate, I found these data were measured in these conditions that are completely different from what they are doing there. So there is no point to do that. Modeling, so we discussed already a strong limitation, and sometimes what you say, too definitive interpretation in the contour, okay? You take the contour as an absolute. So here, I'm safe. Here, it will stink, okay? So that's a bit the way it's done and the way it's interpreted. So we don't want that either because it doesn't work. And also here, what we said before, if you have some good equipment, okay, just to process air and just to treat air and so on, but you don't maintain this one, and it goes to the fit and forget syndrome, basically you won't expect some good performance from this one. So when they do the assessment, they assume that is almost the ideal solution and or ideal conditions, but we know that it won't remain like that if they don't maintain. And most of the time, by experience, we saw that it's the case. No maintenance, and just you decrease your effectiveness just drops. So basically what we did is, we said, guys, we need something else. Okay, we need some other tools. We need to assess and we have a risk assessment based on something else. So now we are working on a suite of tools. Not only one, we need more and a line of evidences, okay? The first one that will become very important and addressed recently because DAR is developing a land use planning, okay? And what we call an environmental standard for separation distances is all the separation distances. So you will have per activities, the various separation distances. Basically, the rule is if you meet the separation distances, the risk and the complexity of the infrastructure and the management levels will be lower, okay, for you industrialists, okay? That's where we are. With the separation distances, you have the S-factor equations. I think you have that also here. It's an equation where you have various factors, and especially for all the livestock, so number of animals, a factor for the waste treatment, a factor for the topography, for the relief, for the sensitive type of sensitive receptors. And also you have some existing empirical data. If you have some complaint footprint, okay, knowing that complaints, we have some limitations and we must be aware about that. If you have some other field surveys, if you have some community surveys where you can see where you have some current impacts if it's an existing plant. Or everything, all of that will be taken in account. However, we thought that, okay, that's fine. We have some better tools now that are more, you know, we can have some ideas about what does exist and what we can do now. That will be better just to manage and to assess. However, we needed another document, and the other document we are proposing now, it's what we call an OMMP, so an Odour Management and Monitoring Plan. This one is a document where you need to have some minimum information in this document. It's a document prepared by the proponent. It follows a thorough review of all the process. You will identify the sources, the process, the activities that are that potentially generating odor. For this one, you will consider what are the conditions, the frequencies, intensity of emissions. Then, when you do that, it means you know what you have to monitor, what sort of monitoring you can put in place, what sort of KPIs, criteria you can put in place. Odor surrogates, it means if you want to measure a physical parameter rather than odors, okay, if you can do it because you can have a SEMS, okay, continuous measurements on that. Corrective actions and effectiveness on the corrective actions, okay, what sort of corrective actions can I put in place if something goes wrong? And if it doesn't work, what are the contingencies? That's the minimum requirements. But also what we can suggest and what is suggested is to have some possible other source and other field surveys, pro and post commissioning. The interest to do that pro commissioning, okay, even for a field survey before the plant is built or expanded, you have a basis, okay? And you can benchmark other survey post-commissioning against that. If you have a footprint that it was like that before, okay, about odors, for an existing plant, if your footprint comes like that, means you have a problem and you are responsible of that, okay? Now it's where if you have responsible, you have some actions to put in place. But also what can be done, it's possible in-house odor ambient assessment. So you can train some employee to do some field surveys sometimes under specific conditions, met conditions, process conditions. And doing that also, it's maybe possible in some cases in some industries to find some correlations between what you find outside and some parameters inside. The OMP should be a risk-based document, should be a site-specific document, and it's an industrial document, definitively. Initially, it's for the industrial to do that. It should be built in communication with other stakeholders. It's very important also. These documents with the stakeholders like are the regulator and the community. and also an internal consultation when you do that. The internal consultation is very important because it means among your employee, you will raise the awareness about other issues, okay, on daily operations on the site. You will profit from the experience because the ground level guys, that's the guys who knows where the issues are. When I go on site and I visit a site, I discuss with the manager, but I like to discuss also with the guys on ground because the guys knows. He tells you where you have some problems really. He knows his business. And also to train some staff to do some other survey as we discussed before. Community engagement, very important also. The sooner the better. If you do that, you will reduce the conflict. You will ensure a better, your license, your social license to operate, basically. And also you can also profit from the community feedback. And community feedback come from various areas, complaints and reference group. So it means you have sometimes some meeting and you will provide some, as an industry, you will provide what they have done, what sort of actions, modification on the site and so on. People will come back to you, the community say, okay, we know that, we experience some others and etc. But also you can use some panel of sentries. I don't know if you know the program NOSE from Suez, where they have some volunteers coming and they train them to recognize the odor of the site and to recognize some specific odors, and especially for Suez when you have some waste or biofilter odor or etc. And when you have some people around the site like that at various locations, if they smell an odor, they can call the operator very quickly, and the operator can identify as fast as possible all the issues and possibly fix it. Just to finish, now, this OMMP definitively initially is a document for the industrialist, okay? The industrialist, when he has that, he will have a map. Having a map, it means because he will have review all the risk related to the major sources. If something goes wrong, he knows what to do. He won't be reactive. He will be proactive on this one. So that's where the interest is. Having that as a proactive also for the regulator, that's a good thing also. When with an application, the proponent will come or the industry will come with that. We'll review that. It will give to us, regulator, more confidence about the fact the industry knows his business. He has a good hand on his process. He knows where the risks are. He knows what to do if something goes wrong. So that's a good point as a regulator, just to know that. It means also if we know that, we don't have to put, thousands conditions in a license where if something happens, you need to do that. If something that you need to do that. It will be everything in the OMP. So basically, you have the conditions and say, okay, you have to apply your OMP. And then also, if something goes wrong, you can use that. You can use the OMMP to do an audit, because you say, okay, this one goes wrong was in this section, so we follow that. This section, you should monitor that. You will okay? Yeah, okay. It went wrong. Yeah, I went above this limit, etc. Okay, did you implement that? Oh, no, I didn't implement that. Yeah, but you should have implemented that. So it basically just gives you a good map also for an audit. So that's also the benefit for the regulator. To conclude, basically this OMMP, so the story just come at the end now. We were at the level where we didn't have anything or very little enforceable conditions in the license as a regulator point of view. As an industry point of view, they were at the level where they had some limited understanding about sources and so on. There was a lot of room, a lot of space. They didn't disturb a lot. Now, more and more encroachment, they need to be more aware. So there will be more pressure on the industry. It will be like that. There is no choice. So try to find a way where it will benefit to both regulator and community and industry. And we think that this OMMP should be a tool that can be useful for and beneficial for all the parties in this one. Thank you very much for listening. As I said initially, if you have any in your jurisdictions, if you have this type of approach with this OMMP included in your regulations or similar than the OMMP, it would be great just to share that if you have. Now, if you have some questions also, it would be good, and I'm happy with the questions. And by the way, if you have some good questions, what you can do, you can come to see me. And after I can give you a little clip like this one. I've got a lot. Very nice, Put in your car, in your desk, here, you give to your kids. They love that, okay? Thank you very much.
think it's like Canada. You've got a number of provinces or territories, and the number of provinces, and each one seems to have its own odor initiatives.
Yeah.
And some provinces are advanced, and some are quite retarded and just beginning.
Yep.
In Australia, in Western Australia, are you somewhere in the middle of that gambit, or are you more advanced, or are you learning from the other provinces?
I think it's a good question. We were one more time. I think we were about 10 years ago learning about a lot of other jurisdictions. We are still doing that a bit because recently, when we were working on the environmental standard for separation distances, we did a lot of reference to the environmental standard guidelines from the Victoria state, okay, the state of Melbourne, and. But basically, we are now more and more, we have more knowledge, more experience to build our own guidelines without referring to so much to the other one. I think to answer your question more specifically, Western Australia was a bit maybe behind. I think now we are close to the middle and even a bit more upfront sometimes. For instance, I've got a colleague working also for the assessment, because I don't discuss anymore modeling after, but modeling is still one tool also that can be used when you do an assessment, okay? You don't have anything, you don't have any plant, you need to assess what should be the potential impacts, okay? What we like to have is a modeling where you will use the modeling as a relative approach, okay? Scenario A, scenario B, and so on, not as an absolute approach, you know? I've got a contour, it's 3,000 meters, and etc. Now, a colleague is working on a multi-percentile criteria. It means rather than having one criteria, you will have 3 criteria, and you have to tick the 3 criteria, for instance. I think it's quite unique. We have the separation distances, we have the OMMP, and so on. I think it's quite unique also. We have, in contrario, the states for New South Wales, for instance, so Sydney, Melbourne, and so on, they are struggling with their regulatory framework at the time. They are still at the level of having one other unit sometime at the boundary where they cannot apply that, basically. So the EPA there is trying to find some other solutions. And now they are contacting us just to try to find some solutions and to upgrade a little bit their regulatory framework, because they know that they have a strong limitations in theirs. So I would say, yeah, we are quite I think, in middle half, yeah. No, you don't want one? Come on.
Okay, we'll move on to the next. Thank you so much.
Thank you.